Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
This show is brought to you by Miles Franklin. They've been selling gold and silver for 22 years, and I'm a customer because when you buy, they ship. For more information, go to milesfranklin.com or call them at 800-822-8080. 1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network, and it looks like inflation's picking up. Just yesterday, it was reported that auto prices are up 7% for the year. And if you're worried about hyperinflation, Max Yemets, he lived through hyperinflation in the Ukraine under the Soviet Russian, I should say, under the former Soviet Union, and he's a bit of an expert in it. Max, welcome back to the Financial Survival Network.
Hey, Carrie. Thanks for having me again.
And we are happy to have you back. And did you catch the inflation numbers? New car prices up 7%, and I don't even believe that tells half the story.
Yep, saw that. Kind of reminds me of the interview we did just a few days ago when we talked about that very thing. Keeping an eye on the things that we actually buy and sort of ignoring the things that the government pulls out of the hedonic adjustments. The auto numbers are particularly interesting to me because as they manufacture automobiles and demand picks up, there will be demand for platinum, which, as you know, it's right now I think is undervalued. So it's absolutely, these things that we talk about are kind of panning out right now.
Oh, yeah, no question. And the thing that they don't tell you when they report those auto prices is the discount. And the discount that you can reasonably expect to get on a new car, assuming one that isn't on some type of special, meaning it's slow moving, it's a dog, sales are down, but without incentives, just a car that you can get that's reasonably popular selling, the discounts are way, way down. You know, they're down to like a couple of percent. It's to the point where I said to the guy at the Buick dealership, I said, why don't you guys just do no haggle pricing? Just cut the price, because to argue over $1,000 on a $40,000+ car, it's not worth it. Just cut the price. Everybody should do it. Just go back to the Saturn pricing. So it's just another example where the inflation numbers are skewed and deliberately downplayed. But when you add that in, the fact that the discount's gone down a couple percent and the price has gone up 7%, you're probably over 10% on new cars with the government subsidies.
Well, think of how much room you can have in the inflationary environment to adjust the price upwards if you're in that position. If you're in a position of sell a large ticket item, maybe a car, furniture, something like that, even college tuition, you can sneak in an extra 10, 15, 20%, and an average consumer is not going to know the difference because they see prices rise. They will look at that as part of kind of the overall uptrend, and we'll be paying that 10, 15% without really knowing it. So I think that's kind of why they don't want to do the fixed pricing, kind of like what CarMax does.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. I mean, anything you go to buy, large ticket item, is going up way more than the so-called stated rate of inflation. And you, having lived through this before, you know where it leads.
Yeah, it's not a pretty place. And I actually just spoke to my father last week about the interview. I mean, he liked it a lot. I had to translate some things for him, but he was very excited that the word got out. And he just reminded me of a story when the only time he ever took on credit, he's very Austrian, very Dave Ramsey type of guy in terms of his financial dealings. But the only time he ever took out a loan was for a bicycle. So two things there. One is the fact that you took out loans for bicycles. It's a story in itself. But the fact that was the only time ever in his life when he did that, And then he, put it in storage and eventually put it together, start using it. By the time he was ready to pay off the loan, he literally paid it off, I kid you not, with pocket change. I mean, he just retold me this story like last week. He said, remember that bike story? And I kind of forgot about it. He said, yeah, by the time they printed enough money, I was able to literally pull out the cigarette money and just pay off the loan. So you can look at that as a little bit of a silver lining in terms of, think of how much debt is out there, including consumer debt, student loan debt. Unless the government comes in and starts adjusting the rates upwards, those people with fixed rates will actually benefit. So there is a pretty good chance that in an inflationary or hyperinflationary environment, those debts will be extinguished. I don't know what that's going to do to the overall economy, provided that 2/3 of it is consumption, and there's vast amounts of debt and derivatives out there floating around that we don't even know about. But at least for kind of people on the ground, average Joes, that could be considered a silver lining, just like in the story with the bicycle that my dad retold.
Well, that's the key. This has been done in many countries before. In Germany, in the Weimar Republic, people who knew what was happening, who knew that hyperinflation was coming and that there was nothing that was going to stop it, they took out loans, they went into debt because hyperinflation is the debtor's friend, and they were able to make fortunes because they bought things that were of value, that had intrinsic value, and then the monetary system collapsed and basically all debts get forgiven. And that's what happens in a hyperinflation, is that it's effectively a debtor's jubilee. So it's easier to just do that without the hyperinflation, just write off the debts, be it government, every level of government, individual, nationalize the banks, break them up, recapitalize them, and let's start over. The alternative of a hyperinflation is so undermining of society's underpinnings and so destructive to the middle class and to people on fixed incomes that it's just a horrible thing, and it's really redistribution of wealth. The buildings, everything is still there. It's just that new owners have it, and that's what's going to happen here.
Well, think of how much more productive it would be to let these zombie banks fail and let the market to come in and reallocate those assets productively. Who knows? Maybe we'll have a new Silicon Valley or the new Apple emerging out of these resources that are freed up and are now used productively, as opposed to just continuing to be thrown into these repackaged derivatives that are complete garbage. At the end of the day, it just doesn't make sense to sort of drive our economy in that direction when all you have to do is just let things come in to reallocate those assets productively, and let the assets that are not productive to simply fail. But of course, that's not the paradigm we live in. So all we can do as individuals and as citizens to sort of continue to look out in each other's best interest. And part of that, of course, we're not inviting anybody to go into debt, but part of that is if you have fixed debt, as you see this inflation creeping up, things like paying down the house faster and paying down your fixed student loans faster, or maybe even your new car, that personally, in my experience, I put that a little bit on the back burner, because I will be literally throwing more expensive dollars at the debt right now when I'm seeing every day those dollars get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Now, a little caveat, put that in the context of wages not rising. I don't think people get, at least in professional environment, it's very hard to get those automatic cost of living increases. And when you do get those every year, they're maybe a couple of points. They're not, 5, 7, 9% to keep up with the real inflation. So the best case scenario, you get a couple of points. But with that caveat, you're wages grow slower than the rest of inflation while you're throwing more expensive dollars at this debt. So, in my personal life, I look at all my fixed debts, things like mortgage, and I sort of schedule it out over the course of, a number of years. And I just put that on the back burner. I don't worry about it. So what I worry about right now is, for folks to have adjustable rate debt, credit card debt, all the revolving debt, consumer debt type of stuff, cars, furnitures, those sort of things. Those things will actually keep up with the rate. And knowing the government, they will start adjusting, or the banks, they start adjusting those rates a lot higher than the rate of inflation. So you will actually be throwing expensive dollars after even more expensive debt every year. So the bottom line is, if you have fixed debt, I would just have a plan, but not really worry about it too much, because I think in this environment, things like paying down the house faster is kind of our parents' and our grandparents' game when the dollar was actually stable.
Yeah, you don't see too many people these days having mortgage burning parties and that type of thing. If the system's going to be saved, then paying down debt makes a lot of sense. But if you believe that the amount of debt that's out there, the fact that last year the Fed bought 61% of the United States government's debt, which means they created the money out of thin air.
It's a little bit difficult to explain in simple terms. So people just say money printing, but in reality, what they're doing is they're writing a check with the left hand and cashing it with the right one. I mean, you're writing checks to yourself, and then you're expecting those checks to have underlying value so they can go spend. It cannot continue for much longer.
The fact is, as long as printing money doesn't cause hyperinflation, the U.S. will continue on.
Yeah, exactly. So once again, if you look at the history, I just did a post on howtobepoor.com about 3 generations of men basically sitting around drinking Jim Beam, talking about the good old times. And I kind of modeled it after myself, my father-in-law and his dad. And when we got together, we talked about what the good old times meant for each of us. And of course, for Grandpa, it was coming back from the war and the greatest generation and the white picket fence and Ma's at home taking care of 5 kids, that sort of stuff. And then that I consider that to be the embodiment of the American dream. With all the issues that were happening at the time, people still look back on that time and that environment as stars and stripes, red, white, and blue. America's loved around the world. You have the post-war economy booming. And then for his children, for my father-in-law, you can kind of start seeing that standard of living declining in terms of when he was ready to start his family and maybe get a house or build a house. Volcker jacked up the rates to 20%. And of course, we know he had to do that to fight inflation. But, it doesn't help a guy who's 21 and trying to start a family. It was a little harder for him. But he still was able to go to college and pay for his college education while working. I think it was part-time throughout the year and then full-time during the summer, which fast forward now to our generation when everything is bought on credit. I got into a little argument with a commenter about buying things like furniture and automobiles on credit, where there is no concept of plopping down $4,000 and buying a couch and a table and some chairs. Everything's financed. And we absolutely cannot pay for college. We can barely pay for day-to-day expenses by having 2 parents work. And a lot of those parents, when you have kids, one of the parents just gives up the paycheck to basically trade it for daycare. Maybe there's a little bit of money left over, but that's, kids go to school or preschool or daycare, and one parent basically works to support that. Well, what do you think is going to happen to the 20 years from now when our kids are in their 20s and 30s? This trajectory is not exactly looking positive. I mean, if you go from literally people that are still alive could tell you, well, silver was money and gold was money and dollar was attached to this real store of value. and a truck driver could support a wife and 5 kids. Fast forward that to his children. Now both of them had to work to have a middle class sort of a lifestyle. Fast forward to their children. Both parents have to work just to keep the ends meet. Middle class is being decimated. I'm asking, what's going to happen to those kids when they grow up 20 years from now? Are they going to have to work as well to kick into the kitty so that mom and dad and the kids are not working to live in a flat somewhere in the city? Like what? My point is the trajectory is not looking good. It's not like all of a sudden we're seeing levels of wealth all of a sudden rising to reverse the trend. We're seeing the opposite. This slow and steady deterioration of standard of living that I personally I tied directly to the fiscal and monetary policies of the country. So it's a little bit, that part is a little bit disheartening because you're seeing the end of a trend. You're not seeing that trend reversing anytime soon. But all we can do now is basically, I write that you can no longer save. You have to hedge because your savings are literally destroyed. And then you can no longer work. You have to hustle. You have to, have countless examples of, teachers taking on second, third jobs just to keep ends meet. So you have to sort of have an extra gig just to stay afloat. And that's what it translates to. That's when people say about money printing and irresponsible government spending and no accountability by the large banks. That's what in reality, that's what it translates to is a steadily eroded standard of living and people having to work harder and harder and harder to keep what they have and just to basically stay afloat.
And that's where gold and silver comes in, because that will maintain your purchasing power. And you've got a suggestion or a strategy for people to use to stay up on purchasing gold and silver? How does that work?
My personal strategy is just buy precious metals in small increments. Everybody can start with eBay, Washington quarters pre-1964, and including 1964 silver quarters. They're 90% silver, and I think they go for about $6, so you can get them $6.50, $7 shipped, and started putting together a roll or two of those coins. But think about the purchasing power that you would have if your parents did that. And all they had to do is just hang on to their change. A little bit of a shift in thinking. If you are starting to think about investment in precious metals in terms of giving up paper and not necessarily purchasing something, I mean, you literally giving up paper and you're in exchange getting something real. Then you can go in and you can kind of graduate to maybe 1 ounce coins. I'm personally partial to Perth Mint, and I like Royal Canadian Mint. And you can get a few coins here and there, or you can graduate up to a roll or two. And there are 3 major retailers. There's AppMax, there's Gainesville Coins, and there's Provident. Just spend $35 and get a coin, and hold it in your hand and look at it, and just picture that amazing store of value that carried the humanity through the centuries that somehow within the last 40 years we just decided to completely give up on.
I think that's a wise idea. It makes a lot of sense. The other thing I like is called Silver Saver. It's an automatic program. You can opt to have it shipped to you every month, or you can just have them hold it and ship it periodically. I recommend getting it shipped every month. You start doing it, then you're going to wind up having some purchasing power when nobody else is going to. All right, Max, we got to take off. For people who want to learn more about how to be poor and about your personal story, where would they go?
Yeah, they can go to howtobepoor.com, and they can also go to Reason Silver channel on YouTube. I post some personal stories from my childhood and my upbringing in USSR and post-USSR Ukraine. And I talk about silver investment strategies on Reason Silver. All
right. Excellent. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on. We'll talk to you again soon, and be well.
Thank you very much, Kerry.